Hi there. Today I thought I'd look at today's pandemic and compare it to three past crises in our country. The Spanish flu, World War II, and 9/11. Maybe they can tell us something about how we can expect to come out of this. All right, we'll see. First, the Spanish flu. Killed, get this, 675,000 Americans, and most of them were young men. The average age of death was 28 years old. And a big reason for that is that the flu hit during World War I when young men were gathered together at training camps, on ships, and in the trenches. And it came in three waves. The first wave came in the spring of 1918. And then the second wave hit in the fall of 1918, right after Armistice Day, when the soldiers were coming back to the United States and they went to their hometowns and they infected the whole country. And that was the deadliest wave. And then there was a third wave that hit in the spring of 1919. Now, what was very interesting is then as now, there were arguments among the cities and states about how best to protect their people against the flu. So, for example, in Philadelphia, they decided to go on with a big parade they had planned. They said, forget it. They thumbed their nose at the flu. And guess what? Within 72 hours, this is not funny, their hospitals were filled with people infected by the flu. And by the end of the week, 2,600 Philadelphians were dead. Bad choice. On the other hand, St. Louis, as soon as they got a sense that something was going on, they shut the place down. And they mobilized the Red Cross Motor Corps. And so they escaped with only 1/8 the death rate of Philadelphia, although they were hit hard in the third wave. The other thing is that scientists at that time didn't realize that the flu was caused by a virus. There were no electron microscopes back then to see the thing. Remember, in one of my early episodes, I talked to you about how small the virus particle is. They thought it was a bacteria, and they didn't have any antibiotics. So all in all, it was a pretty disastrous, kind of a perfect storm disaster. That's what it was. The aftermath, on the other hand, was very, very interesting. Listen to this. Women had to flood into the workplace to replace the guys who had been killed by the flu. And that led to women demanding equal rights, which led to the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote. And that was ratified by the states right after that third wave in 1919. Very, very interesting outcome. Obviously for the better. Made our country better. All right, so now World War II, different thing entirely. 405,000 people were killed. Again, young men. But the aftermath was like a boom of epic proportions. We had the baby boom. In the 1930s, something like 24 million babies were born, okay? In the 1940s, that rose by 30% to 32 million babies. That's the baby boom. Then you have an economic boom that solidified the United States as the richest country in the world by far. But you also saw the rise of the middle class, white-collar jobs, suburbia. We saw the rise of television, of computers, and the start of the civil rights movement, led by Black Americans primarily, who felt left out of the boom. The aftermath of World War II also saw the decline of the small family farm. They started consolidating, creating these big commercial farms that we see today. And it also signaled the start of the Cold War with the Soviet Union and its allies. So all in all, the aftermath of World War II was a real mixed bag. All right, 9/11, again, very different. 9/11 killed 3,000 people, nearly 3,000 people in the blink of an eye. And in the aftermath of 9/11 was huge because, number one, we saw it started the war on terror, and that led us to go into war in the Middle East, cost us many, many more lives. The other thing it started was the U.S. Patriots Act and the Department of Homeland Security. And long lines at the airport. I remember going to the airport after 9/11. It was like a different world. You had security, you had to take your shoes off, your belt. That, even just a week or two before, you could just walk into the gates. Remember that? That was very different. And then the other aftermath of 9/11 was the rise of the surveillance state. What do I mean by that? Nowadays, there are closed circuit cameras everywhere watching you. And most Americans don't realize you and I, on average, on a typical day, we are seen by cameras 50 times a day. Our image, our comings and goings are recorded 50 times a day at separate locations. Whether you go to a parking lot, have a cup of coffee, drop your kid off at school, go to the shopping mall, there are cameras watching you. That didn't exist before 9/11. Now you have your neighbors who have cameras looking at you, and you probably have cameras looking at them. Everybody's looking at everybody. I mean, there's like no privacy. Literally no privacy anymore. That's 9/11, aftermath of 9/11. I talk a lot about this in my latest book, The End of Life as We Know It. Check it out. Pretty scary stuff. Anyway, so that's 9/11, which brings us to today's pandemic. Okay, so as I record this, it's killed more than 30,000 Americans, which is way more than 9/11, but way less than the Spanish flu in World War II. The other difference is this pandemic is killing old people with pre-existing illnesses. That's very, very different from the Spanish flu or World War II for that matter. In the last episode, I explained that. The data we're seeing is that about 78% of all the deaths from this pandemic are among people 65 years and older. These are retirees, and they have pre-existing conditions. That's who we're losing. The other difference is that, yeah, during the Spanish flu, we did shut down parts of our economy temporarily, but nothing like this. This is unprecedented. Take a look at this graph. It says it all. In just the last 4 weeks, there have been 22 million jobless claims. The previous record was 1982, when there were 2.7 million jobless claims in just a 4-week period. You can see, look at 1982. It's hardly a blip in this graph. So the situation we're facing now is completely without precedent. This is really uncharted waters, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. So given the difference, the significant differences between today's pandemic and these other 3 crises that our countries had to deal with in recent years, it's kind of hard to predict what the outcome's going to be. So for example, will people still be fearful of going out even if the state governor declares an all clear? Will people just wait until they feel safe, like because there's a vaccine or a 100% reliable treatment, before they go out and, go to restaurants and shopping malls and sporting events? Good question. Will the current kind of political détente between the parties, the bipartisanship that we see, will that last? Remember, this is an election year. We'll see. Will the American economy bounce back, roar back maybe even, the way it did in previous crises? We'll see. Will there be a baby boom like there was after World War II? I mean, people have been quarantined for weeks now. Will American companies and companies from other countries doing business in China leave China and relocate here to the United States? That's being talked about right now. Very interesting question. Then there's this. Will today's young generation, I have a Gen Z son, he's 20 years old. Will this generation, who has never seen anything like this in their young lives, will they be permanently affected by this pandemic the way my dad's generation was affected by World War II? And if so, how? Okay, look, I don't have any easy answers. And I think you should be suspicious of any expert who tells you they do have answers, especially the modelers who, God bless them, but they have not fared well during this pandemic. But when I look back and study the outcomes of these past 3 crises, one thing is very clear to me, and that is this. We Americans are one tough, defiant, clever lot. Boy, we are. And so here is my totally unscientific prediction, okay? Here it goes. Number one, we will squish this enemy like the nasty little bug that it is. Number two, we will come out of this changed, I think, yes. And I think on the whole, we will be changed for the better. And then third, I think our country, and I mean this sincerely, will rise to a new level of greatness. That's it. Those are my predictions. We'll see in the months ahead. Anyway, as always, thanks for tuning in. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay strong, and stay positive.